Hello and welcome to Leaving Nothing Undared, a podcast from the Department of Continuing Education here at Oblate School of Theology. My name is Antonio Frietze. I'm the director of the department, as well as your host for this podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Nicholas Collura. Nicholas is an experienced spiritual director, he's a healthcare chaplain, and he's facilitating our upcoming offering, Sacred Seasons, an Advent retreat on eco-spirituality. Today, we're going to look at some of the content of the retreat and also, of course, Nicholas's background and journey. Let's dive in. So Nicholas, thank you for joining us today. Welcome. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Antonio. Good to see you, and hello to everyone who's listening.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really good to see you again. You know, we've had some experiences in the past, but I'm very excited to bring you to Oblate to collaborate together and develop this awesome offering for our community. And as I noted before, this is a great avenue for some of our potential registrants to get to know you. So one of the first things that I'd ask that you share is particularly what led you into this kind of unique role as a chaplain, as a spiritual director, and then your concern for eco-spirituality in particular.
Absolutely, yes. And I'd be remiss, I know that many people listening will come from outside of San Antonio, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I have a San Antonio connection, which was that after graduating college, I spent a year doing what's called the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, sort of a service year in San Antonio. So I was working at Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish on the west side, helping out with the youth group and directing a social service office. At the time, it was a Jesuit parish, and it was my first real encounter with the Jesuits, and that began a process of discernment for me that led to my being a Jesuit for a few years. And although I didn't end up taking vows or becoming a priest, it left a mark in me. So that was the beginning of my professional career, really in spiritual direction. The Jesuits are kind of renowned for their work in spiritual direction. So I sought training after leaving the Jesuits as a spiritual director and also became trained as a healthcare chaplain and did that for 7 years in Philadelphia before just in the last year taking up a new role, actually doing university chaplaincy and directing an ethics program at MIT. So that's a little bit of my professional trajectory. And then where did eco spirituality come into this spiritual direction piece and chaplaincy piece? You know, one day I was working as a chaplain visiting people in their homes who were on our palliative care census, and one of my patients had to cancel, and I found myself in a neighborhood near their house that I didn't know too well. But there's kind of a little park, a green space with many, many acres, probably hundreds of acres, called Bartram's Garden there in West Philadelphia. And I stopped there just to spend some time and realized as soon as I plunged into that green space, there's a river, just how rarely I spend any time among trees or by running water. And you know, at the time I was actually had been thinking about, is there something I can do to kind of give back to the community? The Jesuits also care a lot about social justice, and I wasn't doing much by way of social justice at the time. So I'd been thinking about, is there more that I can be doing? And as I was sitting there by this river, it was a moment of kind of a phrase in prayer, you could say, kind of just dropping into my awareness. Would you fight for this? I mean, I think I was kind of aware, as many of us are, about the realities of climate change and deforestation. And it had been in the background somewhere, but really interpreted that as a sign that came from prayer that this is something I should think more about. And so became involved creating an organization called Eco Philly in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia to try to push the Archdiocese to be a little greener, to connect creation care teams within the Archdiocese. And since I was already working in spirituality as a spiritual director and chaplain, exploring the eco-spiritual dimension of that work became important to me as well.
Thank you. That's beautiful. I think one of the things that it really highlights, at least for me as I'm hearing it, is this understanding that whereas spirituality sometimes is thought of as a kind of abstraction or something maybe a little separate from the world, this really kind of highlights that you know, your spirituality ought to have an impact on how you're engaging the world around you. And I love that you brought in that awareness of creation and how we exist in it. So this kind of connection is beautifully illustrated by the retreat theme connecting the Advent season to the rhythms of our faith and our community and our spirituality. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that connection between particularly the Advent season and eco-spirituality.
Yeah, definitely. You know, at some point as I was kind of working this out for myself and starting to learn and do things professionally within eco-spirituality, this was back in 2018 that it started. Um, every time Advent would come around, I'd think about Advent. And even though Christmas can be really commercialized, we all know that. We all feel that in our bones, and we feel that there's maybe a little bit of a discrepancy between the commercialism of one way of celebrating the holiday and the quote unquote true meaning of Christmas. Many of us feel that, and we realize, no, actually, we're yearning for simplicity in Advent. We're yearning to kind of go back to the basics and back to that first moment when Jesus was born, vulnerable, innocent, simple as the Christ child. And that experience that I think we're all longing for has a lot to do with what my experience of eco spirituality has been. You know, kind of going back to the basics, getting out of the mad rush, getting out of the hustle and bustle. So many people say that when they spend time in the natural world, in big nature, as we call it, because we're all part of the natural world, whether we're standing with trees or not, but when we're in a natural environment that makes us feel just the bigness of nature, we often feel that kind of simplicity, that kind of innocence or wholeness. Um, so I think turning to our eco spirituality and the kind of message or mood of the Advent season, I just realized they're so connected. And so Advent has become a special time for me. I'm going to share a little bit more about what someone can imagine in the retreat, but just a good frame for looking at how eco spirituality can animate our Advent season, can animate the rest of our spiritual lives.
Absolutely. And I think part of what you're acknowledging there is this paradox that these seasons of our lives in which perhaps the most demands on our time are made, the most demands on our attention and activity is made. These are actually the times where it's most beneficial for us, perhaps, to take a step back and connect again to that big nature, the bigger reality, the rhythm of our lives together as a community of faith, right? And
Yeah.
I really love that phrase, back to basics, right? These kind of basic practices that exist in our tradition and we can turn to during these seasons of kind of tumult in a good way, but tumult nonetheless. And, you mentioned that you would share a bit about what participants can expect in this retreat. I imagine some of that will be the back to basics practices that they can use in other areas of their lives. But could you share a bit about what each session will explore?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to say too, I love what you're saying about how much we need something like a retreat in the busy seasons. Just reminds me, just kind of parenthetically, it reminds me of something maybe some of your listeners have heard. Um, always, you should pray for 30 minutes a day. And if you don't have time for that, then take an hour. It's like, yeah, especially in the busy times, we need more and more retreat and more and more perspective. So that's a little joke with some wisdom to it. But yeah, the way that I've designed this retreat is to look at some of the traditional imagery of the Advent season and the Christmas story. So looking especially at the manger scene. And in each of three sessions, we'll look at a different aspect or dimension of the manger scene and connect it to an Advent theme and connect it to eco spirituality. So, for example, I think it's significant that in the traditional iconography of the manger, Jesus is depicted among animals. He's born, totally enmeshed in the web of life, not just among human beings, but among all creation. And so we're going to look at that kind of animal imagery and just kind of reflect on what it means for our story as Christians to begin in that kind of natural environment, at least in the traditional imagination, the traditional representation of that scene. Um, and kind of connect that to the Advent theme of waiting. Um, Waiting introduces this idea of time. Salvation doesn't come in an instant. There are seasons in life. And kind of trying to understand, well, what does it mean that human beings are kind of the new kids on the block, honestly? the Earth has been around. I'm not taking a creationist perspective here, where we've only been around for 8,000 years or something, and we were walking alongside the dinosaurs. Um, the Earth has been around for eons. There's other animal species that are following their journey through creation alongside human beings. So, what does it mean for all creation kind of to be groaning in expectation of the Messiah over the course of time? Wanting to really make the point that Advent teaches us that we are part of a really big story here. And anyway, I'll tease out some of the themes over the course of the retreat and not just an intellectual way. There's a little bit of intellectual framing, but really in a way that invites us to consider what our role is in this grand and beautiful story.
Beautiful.
Second, oh,
Oh, go
sure.
ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, second session, I'll just say quickly. Second session will be the Christ child and looking at the iconography, the imagery of the infant Jesus and Mary and this special relationship that they have, looking at Jesus' vulnerability. So, another Advent theme is vulnerability, again, kind of innocence, and that begins to pick up when we talk about eco spirituality, an invitation to a humble and kind of interconnected relationship to the rest of nature and not one of domination or exploitation. And then finally, I'll look at the image of the Magi, these wanderers who come in actually with a mission to harm the Christ child and experience a conversion and go off by a separate way from the way they came, resolving to live their lives differently. And this will be connected to the Advent theme of hope. And how is it that deepening the eco spiritual dimension of our spirituality actually does change us, give us a new horizon, new responsibilities, but also a greater peacefulness and a sense of hope. So this is just a little bit of what we'll be doing in each session.
Absolutely. And one of the incredible things about this is how it builds on itself, right? Similar to the Advent season itself, it's this kind of progression through a process toward culmination, right? These previous steps enforce what our experience will be in the next step. And we've been using a lot of words, like Advent, eco spirituality. I'm sure plenty of our audience is very familiar with it. But there may be some who are feeling a call to attend and participate that are more familiar with some of these terms, some of these ideas. I want to highlight that, in a number of the days and experiences that you've described, we're focusing a lot on some of these common human experiences and relationships. Of course, through the lens of our tradition and our faith, right? But this accompaniment with our families, our mothers, the world around us, our pets, creation, right? These are human experiences that we can use to inform what we bring to this retreat. So I'm curious if you might offer some guidance or advice for those who are kind of new to the idea of eco spirituality or having a retreat focused on it. What might you encourage them to think about or do in preparation of engaging this kind of new material?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I would say, this is not an academic course, so no need to read 17 gazillion books or anything like that. All are welcome. And in fact, although I gave kind of a condensed version, just rest assured when we actually spend time together, our time will be really ample. It's not just going to be me talking at you, but there'll be a lot of experiential time, moments of prayer, reflection, meditation, some time for dialogue with one another. And I like to ask questions over the course of a retreat that kind of make this real and practical. Asking questions, inviting you to reflect on dimensions of this stuff in your real life. What is your relationship to these questions that we're talking about? So there'll be plenty of time to just make it very real and very practical for you and in your own life. Um, and eco spirituality, I think there's nothing really too intellectual that you need to know coming into it. But we all have a relationship to the whole, to the natural world. We're all a part of the natural world, and it's just kind of rediscovering that. Um, we can look at it as kind of returning to a relationship that Jesus even had with the earth. Um, you know, uh, Jesus says, for example, to the disciples, consider the lilies of the field in that famous passage from the Sermon on the Mount. And I don't think he means think about it intellectually. He's not saying I'm going to make like a literary analogy or metaphor between. I can imagine that they were actually passing by a real field, and he was saying to the disciples, just take a moment, pause, actually consider them, actually look at them, experience how peaceful you feel just by looking at them and what they have to teach us. Or in one of the recent weeks, as we're recording this now, heading towards Advent, going through some of the apocalyptic readings that come up in the lectionary. Jesus anchors everything he's saying about the apocalypse by saying, consider the fig tree. When you see it starting to put out shoots, which it doesn't do every year, then you know that the fruit is ripening. So Jesus is always pointing to the natural world to teach us something about our own spiritual lives and how to live in the world. And so when we are kind of looking at this today in our world of smartphones and so on and so forth, we're living at a greater divide, a greater distance from the rest of the natural world than probably any other century in human existence. So, eco-spiritually is just a way of saying we recognize that, and we have an opportunity to return to some of the spiritual framework that Jesus and many of our ancestors, including Francis of Assisi, including Hildegard of Bingen, medieval mystic and saint who was an herbiculturalist, St. Bonaventure, just the many, many saints and many of our own ancestors who had a close relationship to the earth. Just an invitation to go back to that.
Thank you, Nicholas. That's incredible. I think it's more than evident, right, that you bring an incredible spirit of calm and gentleness and a breadth of knowledge to this experience. And I would share, you noted that you served at Our Lady of Guadalupe, and that was my parish growing up. And so we've known each other from that time, and I'm just so excited to bring, this opportunity to the community at Oblate School of Theology and beyond, to really share in this experience that you've brought me in my own life in many ways, and I'm excited to see the transformative impact it'll have on the retreatants. So as a way of wrapping up, is there something that you particularly hope that they'll take away from this experience together?
Yeah. You know, what comes to mind is just a moment to take a breath, a moment to take a breath. I think sometimes when we talk about environmentalism, or when we talk about creation care, we think about it in terms of crisis. And it's true that the natural world, the environment, has seen better days. And it's true that it's important that we kind of take responsibility for caring for creation. I mean, I've given many years of my life to trying to do just that within the Catholic tradition, within the Catholic Church. Um, but it's not all meant to be so difficult and painful and arduous. And what I found in walking this walk in my own humble ways, and can always get better at it, but is that it's so rewarding to really connect, um, to really pause, to go a little bit more slowly, to take a deep breath. We can only breathe because the trees are there alongside us in that oxygen, carbon dioxide cycle. Um, the trees actually help us to breathe by putting oxygen into the air and taking up our carbon dioxide. The time that we're invited to spend in big nature, it's not just demanding something of us, it's actually helping us to slow down, pause, breathe, reconnect to ourselves, and reconnect to God, whose presence we can see in the beauty of the natural world. So I hope that anyone who's feeling like they just need to breathe, just need a pause, can come spend time with us for the 3 evenings of the retreat right before Christmas. Get out of the consumer cycle, take a moment to stop worrying about what gifts you're going to buy or receive, or the other troubles of life, because we all have our troubles and concerns in life. Just take a moment to pause and breathe in preparation for the Christmas season.
Amazing. Thank you, Nicholas. I
Yeah.
appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Antonio, and look forward to seeing many of your listeners very soon.
Thank you. For those of you joining us, the Advent Retreat led by Nicholas Collura will be online, and it'll take place December 17th, 18th, and 19th at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. The registration fee is only $60 plus processing, and you can register by clicking on the link of the podcast description or visiting our website at ost.edu. This is a unique opportunity to connect more deeply with the Advent season, so we'll hope you consider joining us. Thank you again for tuning in to Leaving Nothing Undared, and we ask that you continue to leave nothing undared for the sake of the gospel. God bless you.